Hey guys, today we are looking at this essential question, which is what were the key events of the Ronald Reagan presidency? Last video, we talked a little bit about the conservative movement of the 1980s. Today, we're going to talk a bit more about the specific events of the Reagan presidency. So, this is Ronald Reagan. He was a Republican, and as you can see, he was president for almost all of the 1980s, from 81 to 89. This was the guy in charge. So we're going to start with Reagan's economic policy. And what I mean by that is every president has a sort of a different way of doing things. And so when we say economic policy, we're talking about all the decisions and actions that our government takes that has an impact on our economy and how it functions. And so the name for Reagan's economic policy is pretty easy to remember. It's called Reaganomics. Right, so that's the combination of Reagan, his last name, and the word economics together. That's how we get Reaganomics. You might also see this written as trickle-down economics. Those terms are used interchangeably, like they both mean the same thing. So Reaganomics, or trickle-down economics, was Reagan's economic plan to cut taxes on the wealthiest people in the US, right? The people at the very top of our income. And by cutting taxes, you give those people more money to hold on to, right? They're not giving that tax, they're not giving that money to the government. And by giving the wealthy people more money, or allowing them to keep that money, the idea is all of that wealth would actually trickle down and filter through our economy and actually help everybody else. So this graphic shows trickle-down economics. You have this big pyramid of glasses, and you have one glass at the top, right? This represents that wealthy person with a ton of money. As you pour liquid into that glass and it overflows, right, you see that the liquid, the water, the champagne, whatever this is supposed to be, goes to the next level, fills up this series of glasses, overflows, right, continues down here in the middle until finally even the glasses at the very bottom of the pyramid have the liquid in them. That is the idea behind trickle-down economics. You help the people at the top because as the water flows, right, as the economy flows down, it's actually going to help everybody else. Now, this is one interpretation of Reaganomics. Another one can be shown from this political cartoon here. So we're going to take a minute and analyze this one together. So if I'm going to analyze this political cartoon, which shows a different interpretation of Reaganomics, I'm always going to start with what do I see? What images, what text do I see? And then we're going to talk about what it means. So first off, this whole thing, I have a fountain. This looks to me like Ronald Reagan right here. He's pouring some water into the fountain. And the fountain's a little top heavy, right? You have this big basin right here, this big bucket filled with water, and that's labeled rich, all right, wealthy. The middle bucket, smaller than the top one, right? It's labeled the middle class. And we don't really see a ton of water here, right? We see a little small droplet, and the little frog is trying desperately to hang on to the one water droplet. And here on the bottom, we have an even smaller bucket labeled poor, and I guess an even smaller frog trying to catch an even smaller droplet of water. And so this looks a lot different than this pyramid. It's like our pyramid is flipped. And instead of the water flowing to each level and filling up each level, we're seeing that water collect and pool on the top level, right, for the wealthy. So if I want to put this together and look at, hey, what does this mean? I look at this and I see someone who is not thrilled with Reaganomics. I see someone who is trying to show us that, hey, Reagan is pouring all of this love and support and tax cuts into the rich, and we're actually not getting any of that in the middle class and in the poor. I'm going to have you do one on your own. So this one you're going to write in your notes. So it's a different political cartoon. Same process though. What do you see? Write that down. And then decide, hey, what does this mean? What is this actually saying about trickle-down economics or Reaganomics? So I would pause this, work on this on your own, and then resume the video when you're ready. So just to wrap up, Reaganomics is controversial. Yeah, it improved our economy in the 80s, mostly for upper class white people, but it led to problems later on. It led to bigger issues in our economy. If you were with us today during the lesson, we talked a little bit about the problems of just a couple years ago that Occupy Wall Street brought to people's attention. I'm talking about, the 99% of people that don't have a lot of power economically in this country. So we're still dealing with the problems or the results of Reaganomics today. But we're going to move on to foreign policy. So we just talked about economics. The other big thing about Reagan is there's lots of stuff going on in the world. And so foreign policy is just our strategy for dealing with other countries. So the name of Reagan's foreign policy was peace through strength. We're actually seeing Donald Trump using the same strategy. He's using the same language, peace through strength, when he gives speeches as well. He's sort of adopting this from Ronald Reagan. And peace through strength is kind of right there in the name. To have peace, to be secure, we need to look strong. And so we needed to show our enemies that we had weapons. Or just show the world, even if we're not enemies, right? That, hey, the United States has a strong military and we have the power to retaliate, right? If you mess with us, we're going to mess with you right back. And so we spent a lot of money on our military at the time. Reagan increased the spending of our military so that we would, have weapons and have programs and the ability to be strong if we needed to be. And so one example of this is a program called Star Wars. And a couple of y'all have noticed on my president's poster by the iPad card that Ronald Reagan is holding a lightsaber. And it's not because he was an actor, which he was. It's not because Star Wars is out during this time, which is true. The real reason Reagan has a lightsaber in this poster is because of his program called Star Wars. Its official name was the Strategic Defense Initiative, but I like Star Wars better. And this was a program, and I know this is going to sound super silly, but this was a military program with the goal of developing the technology to shoot down missiles using lasers in space. And yes, you heard me right. The idea is we would have these lasers in space, and if a nuclear attack was coming and someone was sending a missile to hit us with a nuclear warhead on it, our lasers would take out that missile and we would be safe. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it was a program in the 80s that Reagan was promoting. And while it sounds silly, it was actually kind of smart. Looking back, I got to give Reagan some credit. We spent a lot of money developing this technology that does not exist, at least to our knowledge. But so did the other people and other countries in the world as well. And so while we were developing and putting money towards these kinds of technologies, other countries were trying to catch up. And Reagan was playing the long game. He knew that we could outspend other people, and he was right. So we're going to talk more about why this is important when we get to the Cold War. But for now, just know that one of Reagan's peace through strength foreign policy initiatives included things like spending a lot of money on our military. And we got to end with the controversy. So one of probably the biggest controversy of the Reagan presidency was an event called the Iran-Contra affair. You can remember that in Iran-Contra, it had to do with the country, Iran, and with a group called the Contras. And so Reagan did two no-nos in this situation. The first thing that he should not have done was sell weapons to Iran in exchange for these U.S. hostages in Lebanon, in the country of Lebanon. So he sold weapons to Iran in order to get those hostages returned. The second problem was his administration then used the money to support a group called the Contras, and this was a revolutionary group in Nicaragua. At this time, we had a rule, right? We had a law passed through Congress that said we would not support this group, that we would not interfere with another country. It was a law, right? So that was in violation of the law. The other thing is we have a general rule in this country that we do not negotiate with terrorists, right? So this was two things that he should not have done. He kept it secret, and he lost some people's trust. You can think overall, Iran-Contra. This was the Reagan administration's big mistake. People trusted them to maybe act a little bit better than some presidents that came before him. And we saw, at the end of the day, that the scandal comes out, and we see him make a couple of decisions that ended up, biting him. All right, so I'm going to end it there. We've got a little bit of space on the bottom of our notes. You should go ahead and write that summary of these notes in that space. And then check out the board. As always, I got what you're doing next written up there. So just because you're done with the notes, right, doesn't mean we're quite done for the day. So take a look at the board. We're probably moving into some test prep. Remember, we do have a unit test on this unit, our second unit, and our first unit on either Monday or Tuesday, depending on when you've got me for class. So good luck with that. And that is it for today.